Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. I want to start off by letting you know that we are going to be taking a short break from the podcast over the summer, so there won't be any new episodes probably until the start of the new school year, which is in August. I also want to put in a quick plug for our new website. If you go to alpinevalley.school.com, you can see the new design. It's got all kinds of spiffy new features. Our Instagram is integrated onto the main site. It's very cool. I suggest that you check it out if you haven't already. This is episode 25 of the show. You can find show notes for this episode at alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast/EP25. Last episode, we talked about judicial committee. This time we are talking about school meeting, another essential component of our school. The Alpine Valley School Family Handbook describes school meeting as the following. All students and staff are school meeting members. School meeting is scheduled once per week, so school meeting members can discuss and vote on business of the school, including motions to change the law book. Additional meetings can occur as needed. The school meeting is the equivalent of a town hall meeting where students and staff each have one vote. This meeting is used to manage day-to-day operations of the school. The structure is designed to keep the school a vibrant place for all students to learn and grow. Some of the items that we would consider in school meeting as business are the hiring and firing of staff, setting the budget, changing the law book, basically modifying existing laws, adding new ones, eliminating them, reordering things so that they make more sense, and so forth. In fact, over the summer, a couple years ago, we actually revamped the law book entirely, and that whole revision had to go through school meeting for approval. In school meeting, we also review the cases that were heard in JC the previous week and ensure that all of them were handled fairly, or send cases back in the instance that they weren't handled in a way that we thought was appropriate and needed to be heard again. We also hear any appeals of sentences that were made in judicial committee over the week. So if someone received a sentence that they didn't think was fair or appropriate, they could appeal that sentence, and then it would be heard in school meeting, and school meeting would issue a sentence based on the recommendations of the individual and of the judicial committee. We also approve visitors to the school through school meeting. We do parties. Any use of the campus that's outside of the ordinary hours has to go through school meeting. So those are kind of an idea of some of the things that get dealt with on a regular basis in school meeting. The main question we usually get about school meeting is, do students participate? And the answer is definitely yes. I would say students are active participants in all of these discussions and are really the majority of the school meeting. If you think about just students and staff, there's quite a few more students than there are staff. And often they outnumber the staff in the meeting itself, even though the meetings aren't mandatory. Quite a few students still attend. Discussions and debates that happen in school meeting are kept in check by Robert's Rules of Order. So if you're not familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can take a look. But it's basically a parliamentary procedure that allows the meeting to run smoothly and for everyone's voice to be heard without getting bogged down in people making personal attacks on each other or repeating the same point over and over again with no recourse on how to move the discussion forward. My guests today on the show are Eliasen, James Kashevos, and Efe Osemwengie. All of them former school meeting chairs. The school meeting chair is the one who runs the meeting and keeps it in order and also acts in a kind of leadership role outside of the meeting with scheduling people for JC and also participating as the chair of trials. If anyone pleads not guilty in judicial committee, the school meeting chair is kind of in charge there as well. My three guests all share their experiences running the meeting and some of the stories about what happens in school meeting on this episode. Here's our conversation.
Hello, I'm James Kashevos. I was at AVS roughly 5 years ago. I graduated. I should make that clear.
Hi, I'm Efe, and I was at AVS for 4 years.
Hi, I'm Eliasen. You might know me as Em. I was at AVS for about 8 years and graduated 2 years ago.
So we're talking today about school meeting, and I wanted to start off with just kind of asking what you feel like the function is that school meeting serves in the community.
I mean, there's the obvious of governance, right? I mean, school meeting is kind of the governing body. So, I mean, that's the easy, the easy choice. I would also argue there's a pretty big community element to school meeting. There's definitely things that, and conversations that among community members would not be had without the more formal context of school meeting, I think.
Like what? Can you, what kind of conversation?
Well, I think there's a lot of times where, I think there's God knows how many topics about food. I think that without, without school meetings either would not exist or they would be a little bit more, possibly rude. Possibly less conversations and more rants.
I think that in your normal school environment, any rule that you have to follow on a day-to-day basis can seem very arbitrary because you're not part of the discussion that's created that. Here, you're always invited to that discussion, and you're always part of it. Like, you can go into school meeting and you can understand exactly why all of these laws exist, and you can raise up your objections, and suddenly they're a lot less arbitrary.
Yeah, I agree with James. I think it does bring the community together because they can like understand the law book together, and also it's a way for when the JC fails in some way for the school meeting to step in and take care of it. Not necessarily because the JC was doing a bad job, but just because it was needed at the time.
Yeah, and it's like that balance for JC. So JC doesn't have necessarily that authority. They still have to report to the school meeting, and the school meeting can say, excuse me, let's not do that.
The oversight of the whole school body on the smaller body of JC.
Yeah, exactly.
And oftentimes, if there's any kind of dispute that happens in JC, it always goes to the school meeting where the whole school community gets together and works it out.
So why is that important? Why is school meeting an important part of the school? Besides just like we make the rules, what's important about school meeting?
I think what I talked about before, it's not arbitrary.
I think for students it lends a different feel to the environment of the school in general. Like if you have, I spent most of my youth in public school. It was only my high school years that I was at AVS. Obviously, I did feel like I had a little bit more control over my environment when it came to AVS, and I think that was beneficial to me as a person.
So there's an element of control as like a member of that community.
Yeah. If there's change that I feel needs to be made, there's some way for me to enact that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's somewhere where everyone in the school can come to and have like their own voice, so they can come together as a bunch of voices to make a change that they want to do, and that's important here because it's the aspect of independence and controlling how your future looks. I think it's a great place to do that.
I think it's also just important for really internalizing the idea that you can't even have an effect on all of these arbitrary rules that surround you. Like, in the school, if something's wrong, you go to school meeting and you try to convince your peers to change it. In real life, you go to the local sheriff's department or town hall or whatever governing body, and it's the same process, more or less.
Yeah, so it's a reflection of like the real life experience you can have as an adult.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even as an adult, it makes everything feel a lot less arbitrary because you're used to the idea of going in and just talking to people in government.
Yeah.
And that's what school meeting is.
So there's a level of empowerment too.
Exactly.
Yeah. So all three of you were at some point school meeting chair. Tell me a little bit about what the role of the school meeting chair is within the school meeting and then outside of the school meeting.
Well, when I was school meeting chair, basically all I did was I ran the meeting, and then I made the members list for the JC rotation, making sure there was different people every 4 weeks. And that part was pretty straightforward, but I think what I struggled with was trying to lead as the chairman in the meetings and like being the controller of the meeting, so I didn't get out of hand, so nobody was talking for too long or too many times, and that the debate stayed like on topic. And I think that was the hardest part because that was the most important thing to keep control of in the meeting.
And to expand on that, the school meeting chair is supposed to remain entirely unbiased. So, when you're going into a debate and you're trying to moderate it, you have to make sure that you're not influencing it through your moderation. And in that regard, there's not really any set in stone or written in law responsibility in this area. It's much more, you just have to learn it yourself, and you have to walk that fine line of coming in and moderating when need be, but not actually pressing your opinions.
And did that force you to kind of look at what your own opinions were in those situations?
Yeah,
like how to set them aside?
Yeah, I'd say that my year being school meeting chairman was probably when I had the strongest opinions regarding governing the school. Possibly because I was just seeing everything, and I think partly because I had to keep my mouth shut.
So it felt more like, intense, yeah. Did you ever feel, as the school meeting chairman, like any additional responsibility to like act differently as a student because you were in this leadership position? Did that ever kind of propagate outside of that meeting?
Yeah, because I felt like whenever a big issue would come up, like eating outside the main room or whatever, I couldn't really take a stance on it because, like, I didn't want to influence anyone as an impartial person in the school meeting.
So even outside of the school meeting?
Right, yeah, because if I had a stance outside school meeting, then I'd probably have a stance inside school meeting, and those people weren't really separate, so.
I would also argue just the fact that you have a leadership role, at least for me, to some degree, did change the way I looked at my behavior at the school. I would never say I was bad behaved before, but definitely after the fact that you kind of reflect on things, I think, a little more.
I would say not really for myself. In fact, and this is probably the wrong thing to do, but I would absolutely get into these debates outside of my role of school meeting chair. Like, once the meeting was over, I was right into the debate.
You'd be like, okay, now I can talk. Yeah. Well, it takes all sorts, I think. When you're an outsider, or even somebody who's brand new to the school, I think there's an impression that school meeting is just a bunch of crazy rules and procedures. Like, if you're not familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, which I'll put a link to in the show notes in case you're not familiar with Robert's Rules of Order. As a kid especially, it's like, I'm sorry, what are we doing? I have to do what now? How did you deal with that when you were all younger and you didn't know Robert's Rules of Order?
I can speak to that because I was school meeting chair in my first year. I was very confused. I was like, what's internal order? I don't know, like, what's first readings? It made no sense to me, but I had to just talk to people and learn what was happening and watch meetings to see how they went and what everything meant. And over time, I think I picked it up.
But you were learning on the job.
Right, yeah. It was hard at first.
Yeah.
Yeah, to clarify, Efe was school meeting chair immediately after myself, and I think I'm basically the one who pushed him into it.
Yeah, she came up to me while I was signing in, and she's like, "You're going to run for school meeting chair this year." And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, there hasn't been any competition for the role in a few years." And I'm like, "Okay." Yeah, and then I won. So I guess it worked out.
Yeah. James, how about you? So coming into it maybe a little bit older than at least Efe might have been starting. Like, what did it just seem like bonkers to you?
That's a long time now. I don't remember ever seeming quite bonkers, but like, I would say that having come from public school, the raising hand things me was like, dang, I got that down.
Real good at raising your hand.
I can do that. Like, for me, I didn't, like, I didn't actually do a ton of school meeting stuff until until like probably the last 2 years I was at ABS. So by that time I kind of just assimilated a lot of the knowledge. And I never really had a reason before that to kind of go to school meetings, except for occasionally. So I ended up having the benefit of kind of getting all the knowledge beforehand, and then when I finally decided to do more along the lines of school meeting stuff, I kind of already had a lot of preparation for it.
Yeah, like it had sunk in from the other time that you'd spent at school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think same thing for me. Like, I came here when I was young enough that I was happy to just stay out of all of that. It was just this weird thing that kind of happened while I was there playing on the Wii or whatever. And it was in like my last 3 or 4 years that I really got into the governance of the school. I think that's how it is for a lot of students. Once you're just in those later teenage years, since that's the natural point where people just naturally like start taking roles in the tribe or anything, and this is much like a tribe. I guess I'm kind of going off on a tangent. Yeah, for the first 2 years, I just didn't really care about it, and as soon as I got an interest, I just dived right in.
Yeah. What do you think is important about using parliamentary procedure in school meeting? Like, do you think it's important? And if so, like, what does it serve? What purpose does it serve?
Yeah, I would argue it's important. Partially because I think having the contrast from the rest of the school does give an interesting, like, and a different perspective, right? I mean, throughout the whole school day, you can do whatever you want, mostly free of processes. But then going into a school meeting, you have to change a little bit. I think it gives a different perspective on discussions and just kind of things in general, like really just how organizations act when they kind of have to corral different types of people into one kind of cohesive unit to some degree.
I think it's important in school meeting because it can be a very large meeting with a lot of people attending, and you're handling with matters that affect the whole school. So you need to have some containment procedure in place so it doesn't get too out of hand and everything's in line.
I was thinking about the situation that you talked about where you're the hard part about being school meeting chair is keeping everybody on track. And without parliamentary procedure, it's 10 times harder to keep everybody on track. If no one has to raise their hand and everybody can just shout over each other and everybody can make motions and there's no order to what we're doing.
It's not even tracked in the first place.
Right, exactly. That I can shout directly at him instead of having to talk to the chair.
Right.
And then she's intimidated and doesn't want to talk anymore. It becomes chaotic really quickly, even when you're a group of civilized people, and when you throw in a bunch of 5 to 7 to 19-year-olds in there, that gets uncivilized pretty quickly.
Right.
Let's just pretend I was clever and articulate enough to come up with that and say it.
There you go. People attribute to you. What made you? So we know how Efe ran for school meeting chair. The pressure. What made you want to run for school meeting chair in the first place?
Actually, pressure from the previous school meeting chair.
Oh, so it's legacy.
And that might have been part of the mindset that caused me to pressure Efe then. I was thinking it was a great thing that happened to me. Maybe if I just kind of perpetuated it.
Yeah, good. James, were you also strong-armed into being chair?
I don't recall being strong-armed. I also don't recall the reasoning behind it. I feel like looking back on it, it must have been a whim, but I must have more reasons for that than I'm trying not the type to fall into whims, but hey, maybe.
Yeah.
I really don't remember.
I just remember thinking, okay, this is as high as I can go as the school meeting chair. This was my version of the corporate ladder at 15. This is the most authority I can have at this school, so I'm going to do this thing. And then it was just a lot of sitting there and listening to people talk and wanting to tell them to stop talking.
They don't even give you a scepter or anything, right?
No, or a gavel. At the minimum, I
did get a gavel.
You had a gavel?
Well, not during that.
What? Oh, okay.
After I graduated.
Oh, well, that's different. I wanted a gavel during school meeting.
You can't even talk. You just have to say motion carries or motion fails, and that's about it.
Yep. When I was school meeting chair, I gave someone notes about what I felt like they needed to talk about on a motion, because that's who I am. I was like, here, I made this for you. If you want to say any of these things while this motion's going on, and I can't, you just feel free.
I did that with Carl sometimes. It's like, hey, could you put a word in for me? I can't say anything.
It's not really being impartial. We're trying.
Yeah.
The most I ever did was make these meme-like signs to keep people from using the wrong door.
Which are still used today. You'll be glad to know. What do you feel like you learned from being school meeting chair?
I'd say compared to the other positions I held, actually not a whole lot. I mean, I crash course myself on Robert's Rules of Order, but it turns out I don't really use that on a day-to-day basis. It's like learning a language and never using it. And that was really the main thing. I'd say more it gave me the confidence to go out and try all the other positions in the school. Where it's like you're saying, I've just been on top of the corporate ladder, I can go do all this other stuff. And then I proceeded to be, a judicial clerk and school meeting secretary. And those are the positions that were really significant for me. Mm-hmm. But school meeting chair gave me the confidence to try those out.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because school meeting chair, I think, was my first position. And I didn't really like it that much because it was kind of boring for me. But it did give me the courage to go out and do other things like become a JC clerk and school meeting secretary. And those were a lot of fun because I got to do more. But I don't think I would have even thought about doing it if I hadn't been the school meeting chair first.
Yeah, echoing M and Efe, I also actually ended up doing my judicial clerk stint after school meeting chair, partially because it was like, okay, I did one, I think I can handle the other. But I would also argue that, at least for me, was once again the aspect of figuring out how people kind of organize into groups and like how to kind of corral it, even if it's just not necessarily like having gotten older the same system in every place, but there are ways to kind of prove cohesiveness and systems that can be used to kind of like make sure that people are civilized with each other, because that's generally the best time to get conversation out of them. So I think there was definitely some benefit there of understanding like, okay, this is one way to.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Just trying to keep rowdy kids under control.
Yeah,
that can be a huge part of it sometimes.
Yeah. There was an episode of the podcast when I interviewed Bronwyn, and she talked about being school meeting secretary, and the main thing that she remembered from being school meeting secretary was the efficiency of communication being very important, because you have to sit through hours of school meeting where somebody is going brr, 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 and they're repeating the same points over and over again. And she's like, one of the main things I took away was like, I do not want to be like that. And that I had the same experience as school meeting chair, that like the more I heard people with logical fallacies or belaboring their point, I was like, this is how not to be. And now I can take these lessons into my life and learn how to crisply communicate what I'm trying to say and move on and let go of something that doesn't go my way. And that I think for me, just like being in that position of observing so many hours of school meeting put me in a place where I could say, okay, like this is what I want to do, but also here are all the things I don't want to do, and I never want to put anybody through that. Was there ever a time when you were school meeting chair where you felt like you were really frustrated with something? Like the meeting was going poorly, or things were moving slowly, or Efe has one I can see on his face.
I have so many.
Yeah, well, pick one and tell me about it.
I just remember, it's like so many times I'd be sitting in a school meeting, and I won't name names, but these two people were just going back and forth saying the same points. And at some point, I always have to just step in and be like, okay, we need to move on. And then we try to move on and come back to it. I'm like, oh my God. It's just
so repetition.
Yeah, because like the same motion got held up because like someone wanted to make an amendment, but this other person didn't want to make the amendment because it went against the spirit of the motion, and it was a whole thing.
Just going in a circle.
Yeah.
What did you do? You intervened the area and like go to your corners.
Yeah, basically I started calling on other people, and I think they got the hint. It was time. Yeah.
I don't think I ever got frustrated, even if I did sit through people going in circles. I think it never really bothered me quite as much as it did Efe. It just kind of, what happened, let them get out of their system. Maybe I was being a bad chair, though. Because, I didn't mind sitting through it, but I guess everyone else did.
There's different styles, too. You're not all the same.
Yeah, the frustrations were there for me, too. Mostly the conversations that would go round and round. I mean, you only want to have so many 2-hour school meetings in your tenure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would say those were the most frustrating things of like, okay, how can I do this better the next time? And there were sometimes ways to improve. Sometimes it was just kind of like a thing that happened, and you just kind of have to deal with it. But
yeah. What were some of the ways that you found to improve? Like, what did you do when those things came up again?
I mean, really just taking better advantage of Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, there are ways within that system to kind of like, okay, this conversation is going nowhere, like let's move on to something else. And I think that was the biggest way, just using the rules that were already there, but just kind of digging them up, so to speak.
Yeah, like how there's limitations on how many times someone can speak. Yeah, I'm like,
a particular motion.
Yeah.
Gotcha. You already spoke twice. Yeah.
I'm very bad at enforcing that.
Yeah. Well, I think most chairs are.
Yeah, I was definitely selective when I enforced that. Because sometimes...
Wow. You all retroactively impeached.
Because sometimes a motion does need to be discussed more than like 2 times per person, because there is a good back and forth between 2 people that can't be done over 2 separate statements. And sometimes it's not enough.
But I think that flexibility was good. I mean, I think we're a small enough group of people that if we're completely rigid in all of our systems, we're just going to cause more harm than good. So, like, I think some flexibility in those things, and then only enacting those when it's like, okay, this is pretty necessary. I think generally the school meeting chair is a good person to kind of put that responsibility on as to when things are appropriate to kind of start systematically, like being like, okay, this conversation is kind of ready to die.
So on the other side of that, was there ever a time you felt like you had a win in school meeting, where something went really well, or there was something that stood out in your mind, just like, yeah, I did a good job?
Getting elected, although not like there's any competition.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I guess getting elected for me too. I said in the candidate debate that I was gonna put out the chairs for every meeting, and that seemed to work.
You won with that. That's good.
That seemed to work. I only did it for like half the meetings though, so.
Oh, you didn't even live up to your campaign.
Real politician.
I did that, and I didn't even run on that platform. So come on.
It used to be a given.
Yeah. Back in the old days.
These kids.
Yeah.
These kids.
I'm gonna pull the back in the old days card though, and say I do not remember any specific instances of wins. It's been quite a while, so.
That's fair.
I can actually think of a big one. Is the school meeting chair is also the chair during trials at the school, and there were multiple occasions where I think just going through and informing the jury about things like reasonable doubt was the big one. In fact, that was the huge one, and in that way, I think that I might have kept a few people from getting unreasonably charged, or found guilty, really, just by going through and informing them of all those different things.
I do remember actually that while I was school meeting chair, Em and I, and when I say Em and I mean mostly Em, we made a sorting system for the members list for JC so that they would automatically be sorted into younger, middle, and older, so that we wouldn't have to do it manually every time like a student left or came to the school. And it was really nice for making it an efficient system. I mean, no one used it after I left.
That's not true. They still use it.
Oh, really? They do? Oh, well, that's good.
Or a version of it. It's not quite the same, but
right.
It's the same principle.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that felt nice to have that efficiency. Just have a program just spit it out.
Yeah.
In the old days, we did all on paper.
You did most of it. Like.
In the old days, I had to go write it on a chart in my handwriting. Yeah. We didn't even have a computer. Cool. Was there anything else that you'd like to add on the subject of school meeting?
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, good.
I really like school meeting. I miss it sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to tell my favorite school meeting story, which I know at least two of you, or one of you were here for, which is the story I always tell on tours when people are asking about like what it looks like when students are really involved. And then I talk about free eaters. Because that to me was the most controversial, the greatest thing that students have put forth that has still had a lasting impression. So there was this group of people who wanted to be able to eat outside of the main room, which at the time was the only place you could eat indoors. And they brought a motion that said you could become certified to be a free eater. If you went through two motions of school meeting and you hadn't been charged with any food-related mess laws for a certain period of time, then you should be allowed to be a free eater and you can eat anywhere you want. This was met with great disdain by most of the staff and said, no, it's going to be chaos, there'll be food everywhere. And it took a year, an entire school year, as I recall, to negotiate to the point where there was a sufficient process in place that if you became a free eater, you weren't going to abuse your privileges, they could be taken away easily by a vote of school meeting, and then it passed. And it's still on the books today. For as controversial as it was, there was this great give and take on both sides. And I felt like the students that were involved were very determined, but weren't discouraged by the questioning from what it might have been intimidating adults in another situation saying, we don't want a messy school, you can't do this. But they were like, no, well, let's work together. Let's figure out how to make this work. And then they did, and it's still a thing. And it is working. That perhaps is debatable. If Larry were here, he might have a different opinion. But that's my opinion. Is it's working, the school is clean, people can still apply to be free eaters, and there's these checks and balances in place. And it's just this beautiful thing to me about these laws are for all of us and they're by all of us and we can change them and we can do these things we want to. And it's not easy. It takes a long time. But you can actually have an impact on the environment that you live in. And I think that's such a powerful message.
And something that makes me feel especially happy about the whole free eater bureaucracy here there is just that we reached a compromise, even though the students probably could have easily come in, gathered a voting block, and just got it passed through however they wanted.
Right.
But they actually took time to try and compromise and address all these concerns on the other side.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys very much for telling your stories and sharing your experience.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate it. I want to just repeat an idea that was mentioned in the interview, which is that being school meeting chair actually propelled all three of these young people into other roles in the school. The idea that they could hold an office like school meeting chair gave them the confidence to run for judicial clerk, and various other positions that they all mentioned. And I think that's an interesting notion. I've never necessarily thought about school meeting chair as a gateway to anything else in the school, because to me, it always seemed like the highest office, as I mentioned. But I love the idea that this is sort of an easy role compared to some of the ones that are a little bit more work and more paperwork in particular. And knowing that they could be school meeting chair helped give them the confidence to do other things. I think that's really great. Thanks to M, James, and Efe. James has actually been on the show before, and I'll link to his episode in the show notes. He talked about the main room table on a previous episode. Once again, show notes are available at alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast/EP25. Just as a final reminder, we are going to be taking a break from the show for a couple of months, and we'll start up again at the beginning of the new school year. You can catch up on all the past episodes and share them as you wish at alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast. You can also get in touch with the show with your ideas at podcast@alpinevalleySchool.com. I love getting your feedback, and I'm going to have a little time to research various ideas and new suggestions for episodes. So if you have any thoughts, now is the time to send them. If you want to get in touch in a different way, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Alpine Valley School. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Mark Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again in a few months with new stories of real learning for real life.